Be sure to do this in a clean space. You'll need your rulers. We have plenty stored in our storage cabinet, as well as your Duralar. So this Duralar, I've actually doubled it, so I have a big enough sheet of Duralar to cover my entire print. You may only need one, or you may actually need three. Just be sure it covers your print either horizontally or vertically. You're going to also need Sharpies, your X-Acto, and a mechanical pencil or regular number 2 pencil, rulers, a triangle or a T-square, as well as your painter's tape and packaging tape. Lastly, you're going to need some kind of contrasting paper that's cut into strips for our viewfinder. These will be placed over your print so you can figure out how you want to crop it. And these are your materials. Some of the materials will be stored in the drawer underneath the flat file or to the left in the cabinet. Now collect all of your prints and stack them. Grab one of your prints that maybe was the trial one, or your first print maybe has some uneven printing or some misalignment. This you're going to test your cropping to see if you like the amount of border or the size that you cut your print to. So arrange your strips on all 4 sides of your print and move them around until you're happy with your border. So if you decide to have a border like I'm going to have here, I want to make sure they're even and they're at the size that I want. I'm shooting for a 7 by 7 inch square, so I'll pull in my ruler. And again, this is just to check that I like the size and where it's being cropped. This can also be done digitally, so you can import your image into Photoshop and crop it that way. But sometimes it's easier just to take some sheets of paper and visually crop it so that you can easily transition to the next stage, which is cutting. So again, I'm just checking my height and width to make sure I'm happy with what I've arranged. Because this was a handmade image, I haven't set any crop marks. Crop marks help define where I'm going to cut my image. So instead, I'm going to make a jig that will allow me to line up my paper each time and cut it in the exact same spot. So 1, my papers will all be the same size, and 2, the image will be in the same spot on each sheet because I want my prints to all look the same. Your goal in an edition is complete consistency all the way down to the trimming of the paper. So to create this jig, carefully combine your Duralar sheets until your sheet covers the entirety of your print. So for me, this is a small print, so all I do was attach 2 pieces of 9 by 12 Duralar pieces together. If you have an acetate roll, this also works, but just be sure you're covering your entire print. Just align the 2 sheets together and make a nice clean tape to combine the sheets. Flip your Duralar and trim away any excess tape. You want the tape to cover the entire sheet so that it doesn't move during this process. Now with the Duralar attached, I'm going to create the desired size I want for my print. So if you remember, I want a 7 by 7 inch final print size. So I'm going to create a 7 by 7 inch square on my Duralar. Now if you want a different size, like a 9 by 12 or an 8.5 by 11 size, you're going to make that rectangle. So that depends upon what you want. So I'll start at the bottom, and I'm actually using the grid of this cutting mat to help keep everything square. If you don't have a grid, you can use a triangle or a T-square, but make sure your print is square. That's the most important part, especially for presentation and framing. So I'm carefully aligning this square up with the grid, so all 4 corners are 90 degrees. Once you have your image size drawn, you're going to place your print underneath and center it to that shape. If all of your prints are in the same spot, then your image should be cropped the same way each time. Be sure it's really centered. Take a ruler, make sure it looks good. Sometimes you can't just measure to find it centered. You actually have to optically find where the image rests comfortably center. So be sure to take your time here and make sure you're happy. Get a second opinion, have someone else look at it as well to make sure it is center. Now find some easily identifiable objects and actually trace them so that when you place each image, you'll know exactly where to put your print so it lines up and crops in the same spot. For me, I'm using the outside rectangle as well as the hand of this drawing. You don't need to do too many shapes here because this should be a quick process of when you line up the print each time. You should be able to line up your image with these lines. I'm drawing the lines on the outside of the image so that the image sits inside. And now I've taped my Duralar to my table, and so I can flip it back and forth when I put in a new print. Next, grab a thumbtack or a needle, and you're going to poke 8 holes, 2 per side. And what you're going to do is this hole that you're poking is actually going to be the microscopic mark you're going to line your ruler up with when you're cropping. As you can see from above, I'm not using the corners, I'm using the sides so that when you crop, you don't accidentally cut away any of your holes. You can see I circle those holes on the acetate so I don't have to try and find them each time I punch the holes into the paper. I'm using a thumbtack as opposed to a pencil here for a few reasons. One of them is the thumbtack gives me a more precise mark. It'll allow me to tear the paper from the back, and I don't have to worry about a pencil mark accidentally encroaching in on my image. So again, make sure you poke all 8 holes. Don't forget them. I always go over them just in case once before I proceed with the next step. So here's a detailed shot. You can see the holes are punched. And now I can go ahead and cut. You might decide that it's faster to go ahead and punch all your holes first before cutting, but test it out first. So test out the first one, and then when you're comfortable, then you can go ahead and punch all of your prints at once and then cut them after. So I place my ruler to the inside of those holes so that I will cut all of those holes away. You don't want to see any remnants of those pieces in your final print. Do that all the way around. Be sure to stay organized and take your time here. You don't want all of your effort to go to waste with a mistake in the trimming process. Make sure you're using a sharp X-Acto blade. You don't want to use a dull one. You'll know if it's dull if you start to get little remnants left and not a clean, sharp cut. Hold your X-Acto high and tight against the ruler. Don't angle it, and that will ensure you have an accurate cut and a nice presentation. As you can see here, I'm gently gripping the ruler, but keeping all my fingers away from the X-Acto. You want to be careful using a sharp blade and keeping your fingers safe. I run the X-Acto twice just to be sure I have a nice clean edge. And now I've cut my first sheet. Take your time and compare your measurements with your final print presentation. If you're happy, then proceed with your next print. If you're not, erase your lines or adjust your line work on your Duralar sheet until you're happy. So repeat the process until you're happy, and then when you're confident in your measurement, you can now proceed with the next prints. I'm happy with my border size and my final print size, so I'm going to clean up my area and just prepare to now cut down all of my sheets. So here you'll see I'm repeating the process, lining up my print with my jig, and I'm actually going to circle my holes here so I can see them each time. Punch your holes with your needle or your thumbtack. Make sure you punch all of your holes, don't forget one. If you forget one, it's harder to line up. And then move on. You can either decide to punch all your holes at once on each print and then crop, but for the sake of the demo, I'm just proceeding with punching my holes and cutting down my paper. Every once in a while, just go ahead and check that your paper is square and that it's all working together. So again, doing the same process over and over again, but what happens is you get a nice even stack of prints that will all be the same size and will be in the same spot. Remember, this is for our hand-drawn images that don't have crop marks. If you have worked digitally or created your own crop marks, then use those. You can easily zone out during this process. It's important to stay focused so you don't make any mistakes. But it really is rewarding to see your prints in this final stage. If you prefer a torn edge as opposed to a sharp edge, you'll use the tear bar instead of the X-Acto knife. You'll notice the tear bar has a beveled edge. This will give you a nice decal on your paper edge. To tear your paper, you're actually going to line up your holes on the outside of your Sharpie edge. So for my X-Acto, I lined it up on the inside, but for the decal, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger and line up my holes on the outside. Once I've punched my holes, I'm now going to flip the paper over. So this sheet was a sample sheet, so it has some writing on the back, but I'm going to flip it over and tear my paper from the back. It's important that you tear from the back and not the front for a nice consistent edge. The way the tear bar works is you're going to pull the paper against it and it's going to create that deckled edge. So make sure your tear bar lines up a little bit away from your holes, like about 1/8 of an inch away. You'll have to test your paper to see what you like, but you just don't want your holes to show up in your image. Slowly pull the paper against the tear bar all the way through. This will take some practice, so be sure to have a few scrap sheets handy to practice with before going to your good paper. So pull the paper against the tear bar. It's so important that you pull it against it so that you get a nice clean deckled edge. You'll do this for all 4 sides. Again, pull it against. You can do short bursts to get a nice clean edge, so you'll see all pull it against, stop, pull it against again. So pull it against once and just keep going until you reach the edge. Keep the same pressure and consistency. To flatten the decal, use your flat part of your thumbnail to push down the tear for a nice flat image. And there you go, you have a nice deckled image all the way throughout your print. This helps create a more handmade look finish as opposed to a commercial sharp edge that you kind of see in posters. Either edge works, you'll just come up with what you prefer with each print. There are several other ways you can crop your paper, including paper cutters, but this is an easy way to trim your paper consistently at home or in the print shop?